Good afternoon and welcome to our second session of our Inner Course series. This series has been crafted to tackle topics to better assist us in leading our teams through difficult times. On Tuesday in our course series session with the broader teams, we place focus on mental health and its importance to all of us, both at home and in the workplace. Mental health is often a taboo subject, sadly, and many of us suffer in silence. It doesn't discriminate and can affect both you and I the same way it does affect our teams. The challenge we presented with those picking up the signs of mental health issues in ourselves while simultaneously remaining vigilant of the same in our teams. Today, we're going to be looking at signs we should be looking out for, how we can destigmatize mental health issues so that our teams can be more open and honest about challenges they may be facing with their well-being. Ultimately, allowing us to be more open and understanding in terms of the workplace that we're working in and the community that we're trying to center where mental health is prioritized and cared for. If you were able to join us this past Tuesday at our course series session, you may recognize today's speaker, Dr. Nokhanya Khanyile, a mental health ally who helps educate and empower people by raising awareness on the importance of mental health care through her work as a Vice President of Mental Matters. Having qualified as a medical doctor in 2015 after completing her Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery at Wits University, Dr. Khanyile was also nominated as one of 2019 100 most influential young South Africans in the science and technology category. Dr. Khanyile was named the winner of her category and placed 7th in the overall ranking. A love for children has been the driving force behind her decision to pursue a career as a pediatrician, currently practicing as a pediatric registrar. Assisting Dr. Khanyile in facilitating today's session, who you may recognize from the last Inner Course session, is Marina Pretorius. Marina is a highly experienced industrial and organizational psychologist with a demonstrated history of working in the human resources industry and in consulting. She's currently consulting for Broll and working quite closely with us in the Group Human Capital team. Without further ado, ladies, thank you so much for being with us today, and over to you.
Good afternoon, Andile. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and to join Marina in leading you through this session. My name is Dr. Nokhanya Khanyile, and I'm going to be sharing quite an important topic with you today, which is basically about how we can prioritize and make mental health matter, but also particularly in our teams. As leaders, you know that you would be responsible for people with different emotions, people who have different social circumstances, people who have different ways of dealing with things. And so it can be quite stressful. But I want to share some practical tips as to how we can make sure that we're prioritizing our own mental health, so prioritizing self-care, but also ensuring that our teams take care of themselves. How do we maintain our teams and making sure that mental health matters? So who am I? Thank you so much for that introduction, Andile. I am a medical doctor. Pediatrics registrar is basically someone who is studying towards a specialization in pediatrics, which I am about 2 years into. I am also the vice president of an organization called Mental Matters, and we aim to destigmatize mental illness in communities at large because we find that society doesn't want to talk about something like this. We feel that we're weak. We feel that there's not enough information and not enough help. So we want to make sure that we raise awareness about it and force communities to create avenues for help. And so I'm really glad that Broll has brought us on to be able to speak to you about this. And lastly, I use social media as a tool to really go out and speak about health and wellness, either showing people how I do it personally in my own life as a new mom, a wife, a doctor, and also just sharing with other resources that people have made available. So today we're going to recap some of the core series points so that even if you weren't there on Tuesday, you'll be able to benefit from some of the information we shared, which includes some mental health definitions that I went through. And then we'll also be speaking about self-care for yourself as leaders of teams and how you can then take those principles and disperse them through to your team. So let's look at some of the definitions. Mental health. It is a state of well-being in which the individual individual realizes his or her own abilities, they can cope with the normal stresses of life, they can work productively and fruitfully, and they're able to make a contribution to his or her own community. So one thing I want to just highlight here is that while this definition is all good and well and was brought out by the World Health Organization in 2019, with the advent of living in South Africa, we don't have normal stresses. Now, COVID-19 has brought us even more stress. We're having to work from home. We're having to deal with multiple levels of grief, either because of colleagues or family members that we know who are affected or are dying because of COVID-19. And also we have so much more stresses, children having to stay at home with you, you being parent as well as, teacher, having to take care of all of these things that you were never expected to before. And then you still have to contribute to your employment. That can be very, very stressful. And so already, just based on that, we don't meet the definition for mental health. Another important aspect is that it's not just the absence of a mental disorder. And I'll go into the definition of a mental disorder, but what I mean by this is that just because you do not meet the criteria for a mental illness, so for example, major depressive disorder or anxiety, does not mean that we don't have an issue that needs to be fixed. It doesn't mean that we don't have problems in our work or relationship life that needs attention. And so we must ensure that with mental health, we work on it every day. Let's talk about burnout. This is something I think a lot of people have heard over and over again. It's spoken about on so many levels. And so burnout is just a syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not successfully been managed. And this is important because we're, as leaders, you are sometimes responsible for driving the process towards getting your team out of burnout. And I want you to look at the 3 dimensions of feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion. Working from home can already be a lot less stressful than having to go into the office the whole day. But if you're sitting, pushing deadlines, you can really feel burnt out and exhausted at the end of the day. It can also lead to increased mental distance from one's job. So that could be you not interested in what's happening, being very distant when you're in meetings, not contributing at all. And lastly, reduced professional efficacy, not being able to meet deadlines for whatever reason, fighting with colleagues, not being able to deal with conflict properly. All of these things are signs of burnout. And if you see these in your teams, I would like you to step back and see maybe this employee or this team member is not actually being difficult. Maybe they're burning out and they're needing help. Mental disorders are different from burnout because with these, there is a pattern that reflects underlying dysfunction. So there's actual medical, biological, or psychological issues that are leading to dysfunction. There are also consequences of which are significant distress or disability, and they're not merely an expected response to common stresses. They also result in a result of social deviance or conflicts with society. And what I mean by this is you must look at the different members of your team. Some are living at home alone with no dependents. Others have, families that they need to take care of. Some are the firstborn, some are the lastborn, some are, the breadwinner at home. So because of these different societal responsibilities, we cannot put the fit of mental illness as a blanket statement to cover everybody. We need to take each individual into account, which includes yourselves as leaders. So this is just a recap of the previous sessions. The absence of a disorder could still mean dysfunction. So just because you don't meet the definition for depression, does not mean that you may not have symptoms. Beware of habitual burnout. And what this means is over and over again, you finish one deadline, you're moving on to the next deadline, and so on and so forth, and you just continually burn out. Mental health is exercise for your brain. So we spoke about the fact that physical health can impact mental health and vice versa, and that the one is not more important than the other. They work synergistically. Presenteeism is more detrimental than absenteeism. And I'll recap on this one, particularly in this talk, because you'll see how being present at work when you're unwell can be worse than actually taking the day off. And also we share 10 biopsychosocial tools that people could do from today that can help them. And I'll go into these again. So why the core series? And I spoke about this. Broll really on their website spoke about the Brollies, strengthening the core of the business, which was you, the employees. And I really admire the organization for doing this because not many people understand that. If you look at the core, the definition is the part of something that is central to its existence or character. And we look at sit-ups. We must remember that maintaining your core is very difficult. If you're a woman and you're like me, you know that whenever you eat anything, it's the first thing to go. So it's very important to continually maintain it over and over again. So how can you as leaders maintain your self-care? Before we even get into maintaining self-care, what is self-care? So self-care then looks at the practice of taking action to preserve or improve one's own health. You'll find that I enjoy definitions a lot. The reason I enjoy definitions is because it helps me understand the steps I can do to meet the criteria for this thing. Another definition I saw also spoke about the fact that you maintain self-care without the help of a medical practitioner or medical professional. And this is important because we want to save people time, money, and also admin of going in and seeking professional help. So what little things can you do today in your own environment to maintain this? And there's 4 dimensions, which are physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual. So what are these? If we move on self-care, and these are the 4 that we'll go into, we'll come back to practice last. Let's talk about what self-care is as an act. And this is where I'll come to the 10 scientific ways to be happy, which are biological, psychological, social. And the last one I've added in there is spiritual, which wasn't in the talk yesterday. The reason is because I feel that spiritual encompasses all of these. It brings them all together and grounds you, or it uses a belief that you have to ground you and allow all of these to really flourish in your life. So let me just go back here. I want everybody to please look at this, and there's a lot of information and there's a lot of words going through here. But if you look at each individual aspect, the yellow being your physical health, how can you take care of yourself physically? Go outside. Studies have shown that even going outside for 20 minutes a day, just to get the sunlight, increases vitamin D. So vitamin D is a hormone in your body that you can get from sunlight, and that improves your mood. Just the act of leaving the desk and moving away from whatever it is that's stressing you can make you feel better, and also can bring a flood of creativity because you're physically removing yourself away from that stressor and your brain is able to relax. Going into sleeping more. Sleeping more is so important. The average adult needs about 7 to 9 hours a day. How often are you as a leader getting that amount of sleep in your day? And, you know, we have 90-minute sleep cycles. So I always speak about trying to fulfill those 90-minute sleep cycles so that you get a full cycle of repairing your mind, your body, your memories, your efficiency, and then coming back up. If you look at exercise, studies have shown that even 7 minutes of exercise a day or 30 minutes of exercises 3 times a week can help you improve your mood and also just help how you feel about yourself. If you do struggle with mental health or issues, or you do have some depressive symptoms, there was a study that went into looking at 3 groups of people who suffered from depression. The first group was given medication only. The second group was given exercise about 7 minutes a day only. And the third group was given exercise and medication in combination. And what was surprising was that the group that just had exercise had only a 9% relapse rate back into depression after 6 months versus the group that had exercise and medication at 31%, or just medication alone at 33%. So you'll find that just the act of moving releases endorphins, important dopamine and serotonin. These are all neurotransmitters or messaging chemicals that your brain sends that helps you become more productive. We also then look at the green, which is psychological, moving closer to work, which is a little bit of a misnomer now because we actually are working from home. But ensuring that you're protecting those working hours, and also things like meditating, planning a trip, even if you don't necessarily take one, can make you feel better. Practice gratitude and practice smiling. These are 2 of my favorite activities to do because they're simple. I don't need to tell anyone about them. I can just do them as I'm sitting now. While you're listening to me talk, you can think about 3 things that you're grateful for today. You can even smile at your camera, but it's important in order to get the benefits of this activity. Smiling needs to be done with your eyes. So if everybody looks at me, you don't just smile with your mouth. You need to smile with your eyes, to the point where it actually closes and your eyes, and that will make you feel better. So moving on to preservation. It's important that you preserve this time. Self-care is something you have to take seriously, because if you don't preserve this time and preserve these actions in your day, you won't be able to act upon them, and you won't be able to practice them over and over again and become good at it. The one thing I always say to people is, the same way that you need to exercise and get stronger is the same way that you need to practice self-care and practice mental health methods to get yourself into a better place. You won't just stop feeling sad or stop feeling stressed after one day. And therefore, you need to take it easy. You can't just go and pick up 60 kilograms of a weight and do a squat. I mean, that would be totally awesome. And in the same vein, you can't just start exercising today and have like that squat body, which would be even better. So be gentle with yourself. If you don't get it the first time, if you make mistakes, if your form is off, allow each individual step to be a ladder that you use to go higher and higher towards the journey at the top of your best self. The last thing I want to talk about before we break into the groups is just improving your mental health. So improving your mental health looks like something like this. The talk that Eric Vermeulen gave last week about the six tips to shift your mind from a place of resilience to endurance had a story about his son who wanted a PlayStation. And he was speaking about goal setting. In order for you to improve your self-care, you need to improve yourself. And I thought, what a better way than to goal set? So you need to decide what it is that you want to do. So you have now made a decision that this is what I want. Then write it down, but be careful about what you write down, because you can't just write down some grand plan that's unrealistic. Really think about it, take it seriously, and make sure that it's something that you can do. Set a big goal, but don't set something that's going to make you feel more stressed or more overworked. Tell someone about it. And this is why it's important that you have an accountability partner. For me, those are some family and friends, depending on what the goal is. But for you, it could be social media. Some people use it and say, social media in 3 months' time, this is what I'm going to be doing. For me, what I did was I have this road to summer body where I've just had a baby and I've decided that this is something I want to do. I've made myself accountable by posting my workouts on social media so that people can see that I'm doing things every day. Whether the body comes with a six-pack at the end of the day, I don't know, but at least I know I'm taking steps every day to get closer and closer to that goal. And then break it down. What does you achieving this goal look like? So could that mean that you need to, if we use the example of me exercising every day, finding a personal trainer, finding time in my day so that I'm able to go there? Who's going to take care of my baby while I'm there? Do I need to eat better? That would be a good idea. So breaking down and really thinking about each individual aspect, and then moving on to planning your first step. In my case, is finding a personal trainer, going on to Google, speaking to family and friends. What do I need to do? Because as you know, a marathon starts with just one footstep taken in front of another, in front of another. So you just have to plan that, doing those things until you get to your goal. And keep going. You can't run a marathon by just stopping after the first step. You have to keep going over and over again. I personally hate running. I don't understand how people do it, but I understand why it's important, because the more you do it, the stronger you become, the better you become, and the more efficient you become. So as a leader, you definitely want to be able to continue and improve your resilience, improve your endurance, and make your team a lot stronger. And lastly, celebrate. I think people don't do this one enough. Whether it is you making sure that at the end of it, I have a friend who is also a registrar, but she's studying to become an obstetrician and gynecologist. And what she does is at the end of each 4-month cycle, which is a rotation, she celebrates with a gift that she buys herself or some champagne. And what that means is she's giving herself permission to say, I did it. I had an amazing journey. I worked hard. Let me celebrate. I met my goal. Even if you want to break it down and celebrate at different points, make that clear so that you can feel better about yourself at each point. So now we're going to practice. We're going to practice self-care by breaking off into our groups. And I'm going to hand over to Marina to please lead us into the discussions.
Did again. Thank you very much for unmuting me. Dr. Kanile, thank you for that valuable information that helps us to focus on self-care. Colleagues, you've heard last time also when we introduced the Inner Core series that we intentionally designed it in such a way that it's a 90-minute masterclass, and that the focus here is very important. You as leaders, we saw this model in the last session, that leadership is all about focus. And in this 90 minutes, we particularly want to focus you on, first of all, the self, you as the leader, and then on the others. I've found in my experience, and also just listening last week in on the group that I was in, that leaders very often tend to focus on others. And they are when they take their responsibilities very seriously. But I hope that you've heard now again from Dr. Kanile, and you're probably going to hear it from all our speakers, is that focusing on the self is where you replenish and where you preserve so that you can give to others. So you're going to see this model every time. We've brought in the breakout sessions to give you a moment now to pause and to take in what you've heard now. But then we are also going to very practically exercise this goal setting approach that Dr. Kanile shared with us now. So we're going to give you, and you can move on to the next slide, please. We're going to give you some time to think about what stood out for you personally from the information that she just shared with you. And which of the 10 scientific ways to be happy do you need to pay more attention to in your own life? So you can write these down, please. They're not going to be visible when you go into the breakout rooms, so you can maybe just jot them down quickly. And we want you to very practically go through the first 5 steps of the goal setting process. Decide to participate, and then talk to someone in the group. You're going to be in groups of 3, and with your colleagues, I'd like you to just take turns and then discuss with one another what stood out for you personally from the information shared, and which of the 10 scientific ways to be happy do you need to pay more attention to. In that way, based on what we've learned last time from Ingra, you give your brain that goal, it knows where to go to, and tomorrow there's going to be some practical things that you may be able to give attention to. So let's break out in the rooms. It's going to be 10 minutes. You'll be seeing the timer that counts down in the last 2 minutes so that you can wrap up your conversation. And then you'll be brought back automatically into the main room. And then we're going to continue with Dr. Kanile's talk on then how to support our team members further. So enjoy the conversation and the connection with your colleagues.
Great. So I think everybody is back. I'll give maybe everybody about a minute to come back into the rooms. Okay, so welcome back. I hope that everybody had a really great breakout session. I hope that you went into each of those aspects and you were able to find some productive and meaningful takeaways from today. I'm going to move on now and speak about something that's very important, and that is maintaining your team. Maintaining your team can be just as important, if not more important, than maintaining your own self-care. While it's important that you can't pour from an empty cup, your team needs to draw on your strength. And so once your self-care is maintained and it's intact, you can then really help your team achieve the goals that you guys set out, but also achieve their own mental health and ensure that that is successful. So why is maintaining your team even important? We look at the effect of COVID-19 and mental health. And these infographics are from the South African Depression Anxiety Group's website, and they're easily accessible. There were many studies done, and some of the stats that were done show the effect that COVID-19 had on mental health. The one item is, if you look at the biological sex of the people affected by mental health issues, we have 85% of females and 15% of males being affected, with 27% of people aged 26 to 35 and 21% of those aged 36 to 45 being affected. If you think about the teams that you lead at the moment, if we think about 85%, that's almost every 2 out of the 3 women that are in your team would be affected by mental health issues. And at least 1 man in a group of 5 would be affected by mental health issues. We don't specify what that is. It could be depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, even people suffering with suicidality. But please understand that this is what is happening. We look at current employment status, 62% of the people are employed. So those would be the people in your team. But in the home life, 16% of people live alone and 47% live in 3 to 5 member households. So not only do they have to manage their own care, but they have to manage those around them. So 50% of your team, half of your team is living with other people, which means there are personal relationships, interpersonal relationships that they have. And remember, I had mentioned earlier on with regards to mental health disorders that there can be dysfunction due to mental health disorders. So are they having dysfunction there that's now pouring over into work? Or is the work environment pouring over into the dysfunction that they have at home? We look at Gauteng being one of the top or the top area where there are mental health issues, sitting at 60%, and then the Western Cape and KwaZulu-Natal. And so there's a lot of information on this infographic, but I really wanted to put this into context for you. Look at your team. How many people fit into one or more of these categories in your own team? We then go into mental health and stigma in the workplace, where, even before the onset of COVID-19, 79% of females and 21% of males were affected by mental health issues. And I want to draw your attention to the infographic that's on the right, top right, where managers respond to disclosure. So what that means is when someone in your team speaks to you and says, I'm experiencing burnout, I'm experiencing depressive symptoms, I'm experiencing anxiety symptoms, what is your response? Think about that for a second. Would you be negative, like 30% of those statements, like you're being lazy, you're not burning out, you just need some more motivation? Would your comments be more positive or useful? How can I help you in terms of getting you to the right avenues? Do we need to speak to HR? How can we improve the working hours? How can we improve the amount of workload so that you're not feeling so overwhelmed? Or would you be indifferent? Let me know if you need anything. I'll be here if you need anything. So it's important, I think, firstly, before you even go to helping other people, what would your baseline response be to your team members if they had said that they are experiencing mental health challenges? And then once you are aware of your own self, you can then extrapolate that to the rest of the team and help the rest of the team. Before we go on, I'd just like to ask if anyone has anything that they want to ask, can they pop it in the chat box? And then we'll address those after the next breakout session. And also just to take notes of the questions and write them down at the end of the session. This is an important demographic. It speaks to depression's impact on the South African economy. I showed this infographic because this information was from 2017, and I haven't been able to find another infographic on more recent times, especially since COVID-19. But considering that this was in 2017 and already this was such a significant impact, you can imagine now how much more it has increased. So presenteeism would be absences or attending work while you're feeling unwell, whereas absenteeism would be an unscheduled absence from work. And if you look at the infographic there in the States, 190 billion Rand was attributed to presenteeism, which cost the South African economy, versus 28 billion Rand, which was attributable to absenteeism, which is people not coming in because of unscheduled absences. For a business like Brawl to really perform, I understand that you may be driven by targets, and those targets may be numbers. Can you imagine if over 500% of your work was lost because of people coming to work and not being able to work effectively? And as managers and leaders in your teams, it's important sometimes to note where these small changes can be made, because it could literally save lives, but also save your business. So let's lead your team to self-care using the principles of self-care again, which is practicing, acting, preserving, and improving one's own health. How do we act? So using these scientific ways to be happy, I'm going to move straight into preservation, because we already know the 10 steps, but how do we preserve those on a daily basis and say to our team members, we need to do particular things every single day to make sure that we are healthy. Biologically, we can preserve our team by taking regular breaks. Encourage your team members to take regular breaks, because I think at the end of the day, especially in a world where we are so driven by targets, we're so driven by deadlines, we want things to get done as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible. We may lead ourselves to work 3, 4, maybe 5 or 6 hours in a row without taking a break. This means that we have people who may get into a zone, and my husband actually does this quite often. He gets into a zone and he works 3 or 4 hours at a time. And then after that zone, he's completely exhausted. Whereas I tend to do something called the Pomodoro method. So I use this, and some people do different things, where I work 25 minutes and then I take a 3-minute break. I work another 25 minutes, I take a 3-minute break. I work a third 25 minutes, and then I take a 30-minute break. So by breaking down those tasks into smaller chunks, in the same way like goal setting, I need to eat the elephant bit by bit in order to eat the whole thing. I try to take regular breaks through my work. And sometimes a regular break could just be turning your eye away from the screen. Also, exercise, meals, sleep. I'm a medical doctor, and I know that it's very, very difficult sometimes when your call is incredibly busy to even eat or take a break and sit down. But when you're working from home, you'll be surprised by how many people don't do this. You need to ensure that you're eating well. And so that means that you don't wait until you're famished, because obviously you're going to want to have everything that's bad for you. I do this quite often when I'm at work. So I make sure I pack my lunch and I have it there. Try and get small snacks. I have some, nuts that I keep on my desk, something with protein, something that's small that you can snack on, that's healthy. So that by the time you get to lunch, you're not thinking, oh my gosh, I can't wait to eat anything. And your sugar levels are crashing. You're completely feeling lethargic because you just want to eat. And then you have some high calorie meal, and then you get what they call the itis, which is after a meal, you feel completely exhausted and your productivity is shot. Also ensure that your team is sleeping enough. So I don't know how possible this is, but try as much as you can not eat too early in the morning. And they get it not is a different story, but try and make that something that you push in your environment and in your team. And then also we can talk about exercise. So exercising could say to your team members, okay, everybody, I've just come back, speak about it actively. I've just come back from a run. You don't necessarily have to push them into doing particular exercise or workouts, but the more you do it yourself and you maintain it yourself, speak about it so that they see, oh, okay, well, this is possible. Maybe I'll be able to fit it into my schedule. The last thing is sick leave. And this is quite a difficult topic because how do you take sick leave when you're working from home? What does sick leave when working from home even look like? And I encourage managers and leaders to please protect this time, because when your employees are sick, they need to recover. And while it's important that you do have deadlines or you have things that need to go out, you must please allow them to be able to take that time to recover, because they're not in a position where they can say no to you. So please, when they say I'm taking the day off, don't WhatsApp them for one or two things or that quick email that they need to reply to. Try as much as you can to make your team efficient enough that if you lose one member, that whole team doesn't collapse. Allow everybody to work together so that you're able to protect time away if it needs to be done. And this also goes for time when people need to leave work for like normal reasons, when they're taking leave. If we move on to psychological aspects, how can you protect the psychological health of your team? One thing is an open door policy. And this one I put first because it's very difficult for some people now in the setting of working from home to have this policy. But what I mean by this is to say, give your colleagues and your team members the ability to come to you with issues and suggestions. You'll find I particularly work in quite a hierarchical environment. So we have consultants who are the specialists. We then have us who are the registrars. We have medical officers who are trying to come into the academic program. And then we have interns who would be what they call like our workforce. They are workhorses. And then we have medical students below that. And so what you find is that because the medical students are at the bottom of the food chain per se, they feel that they're unable to communicate or share ideas or suggestions about things that they think they need to do with patients. And some of them have really great ideas. But when you foster that environment within your team, you find that people feel more relaxed to come and speak to you. And you might actually find some pretty impressive gems within your team that you never thought of before. People will also feel more confident. Your team will be able to trust you more and be able to relax around you. And when they speak up, they're taken seriously. An open door policy also means that you need to be honest with your team and communicate to them what you are and are not comfortable talking about. So if you are not comfortable with them speaking to you about mental health issues, I'm just going to skip to the last point, which is show them avenues for help. If they do come to you with a problem, know in your department, in Brawl Property Group, where HR would send them to. Is there any, mental health services that they can access? Because once you arm yourself with that knowledge, you can then help your team get the help that they need faster. I always talk about gratitude, and gratitude in a team is incredibly important. As a leader, people look to you for approval. They look to you for, recognition. And so please do, even if it's small things. One of the incredible things that one of my consultants who's a specialist does is that they love saying, that's a great question, because it makes you feel like and encourages you to do more and ask more. Don't underestimate the power of gratitude within your team. It's also one of the 10 steps to make people happy, scientifically proven. So please do cultivate this a lot more in your team. Gratitude could also be like buying people lunch. It could be organizing, something fun for the team to do. Anything within your scope that you feel could be important. And then also mental health leave. It's important to note that some mental health admissions can be by law 21 days if they're involuntary, but can also be 7 days if they are voluntary. When your team members come back from these particular breaks, please try and foster an environment that allows them to be comfortable coming back. This means that, questions are not asked about them and what happened when they were gone. They're not discriminated on other people. If they are unable to meet particular tasks, please prevent them from hearing gossip or hearing terms such as it's because of this condition, or if you were here during this time, you would have known this. I've heard horror stories of people who've had significant mental health admissions and they needed those admissions coming back into the work environment and being stigmatized to the point of actually pushing them back into another depressive episode. Moving on to the social, how can you improve the social mental health of your team? And this is where I really enjoy when team leaders take this on, because you can discuss things like deal breakers. And this is individual for your team, and it will change from season to season. So for example, if you are in the beginning of the month versus the end of the month, I know that some teams who work in finance departments, around payday, they have to be a little bit more, work longer hours, etc. But in the middle of the month, they can relax. So this will be very important for your team, because when you individualize it for your team, you look at the needs of each individual person. So for example, if they have children, if they have to help with homework, if they have particular big anniversaries or birthdays coming up. The one example is in our setting, when we do our rosters for the month, everyone is allowed one request, and your weekend is protected for that weekend so that we can allow you to go off into whatever family or commitment you want to partake in. It's important to note that everybody in your team is different. People have different needs. So make sure you announce those deal breakers. After 5 o'clock, we don't do work because we understand that people, one, need a break. And secondly, we know that they need to attend to homework or whatever it is. And once you cultivate an environment where people feel they can do that, you will see that individualizing it for your team may make your team more desirable. You may have a better performing team. You'll have people who are more willing to go the extra mile for you because they understand that you are protecting them and making sure their mental health is key. I also added gossip here because gossip should be a deal breaker in your team, especially because gossip can significantly affect mental health, whether someone has issues or not. And so that's one rule I always speak about. Whenever I hear people start talking about another team member, I actually leave the room. It's very difficult because I have missed out on some juicy information and juicy stories. I've also been alienated from some groups of people, but I found that the relationships I have are based on my experience and not those of other people. And people tend to respect me a little bit more because of that. Clear communication. I would say that as a leader, you need to communicate your targets, expectations, and concerns early with your group. So I would suggest maybe on a Monday morning, or if you decide that your week is going to start on a Wednesday. We had a team in our hospital that decided that the Wednesday was the beginning of their week, because that allowed them to get everything out before the weekend. And then by the time they come back in, they're not rushing to by Friday, and they're not rushing to get everything done for Saturday and Sunday. Everything kind of flows in so that they can wrap up by Tuesday. That was really nice because then the team felt a little bit more relaxed. They weren't as panicked. They didn't feel like on a Sunday night they had to rush and do work. They felt that all of their targets could be met by Tuesday, and that made them a little bit more relaxed. But you need to communicate that to your team, because when you do that, they then know what they need from what you need from them, and also they can communicate what they need to you. For example, if I'm feeling ill or if I have a big operation coming up, I can then say, I won't be able to attend this meeting on this particular day because I'll be in recovery, whether they do that offline or whatever. It's important to give people those kind of spaces. And stick to working hours. This is incredibly important. Have a clear communication with your team. From 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock, we work. Outside of that, we protect those hours, and you have to fight for that. In some instances, it can be difficult, and this is why communicating with your team early is important, because then they know and they can plan. There's nothing worse than finally getting ready to have that wine, and now you have to move into and have this new deadline that you have to stick to. And lastly, meeting free days or hours. Sometimes it's nice just to wake up in the morning and go onto your laptop and do your work stress-free without knowing that you have to rush into a meeting. You have to look nice, you have presentations that you have to prepare, etc. It can be nice to just really cultivate a little bit of relaxation in your team to say, on these days, we don't organize and we don't schedule meetings. That can really help your team be a little bit more productive. And so the last thing is also now we're moving on to improving your team, and that works on spirituality. Spirituality for me is what is the thing that ties everything together, or what is the thing that you start from that allows everything else to be successful, and that's preventing burnout. As a leader, it's really, you are the custodian of preventing burnout, because if you can reduce those chronic workplace stresses for your team, then you'll find that they're a lot more successful. And again, helping them set goals. I think this is difficult because we don't want people to leave us. We don't want people to move on to other positions. But I've actually found that when I feel that my superior is really encouraging me to go outside of just work, if they're allowing me to go into my hobbies, all the goals that I have that are outside of my job, I really find that I'm contributing more positively to my team, but also they are positively contributing to my life. And I want to, do them proud. And so we're going to move on to our second breakout session. And I will be handing over again to Marina to speak about these topics.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kanile. Sure, that's so practical. And colleagues, I've asked you in the chat box as well. You are very welcome to add there also. I'm very sure that some of these practices you already do, and that you have some wisdom around whether they work, what you do to make them work. So please feel free to share that in the chat box as we go along, also in the Q&A time. But now we're going to add you back to your group where you can continue your conversation. I want to ask, what of those behaviors that you've seen that is maybe not that conducive are you seeing with your team at the moment? So if you can just move one back, thank you. What behaviors are you seeing in your team around these practices? Are they good habits that people are maintaining? Are they maybe not that good habits that people are maintaining? Which ones sprang to mind as actual examples when you listened to Dr. Kanile talking about them? Then which of the tips can you implement to help improve your team's mental well-being? Which ones sounded practical enough for you to take and that you think you can maybe get going in your team? And then very practically, I want to challenge you all to share with one another, what will you share with your team tomorrow from what you've heard today? Even if it's just one of these practical tips, which one do you feel that you can take and go and share with your team so that they can maybe take that further for them? So please enjoy your conversation further. We'll see you in 10 minutes again back into the main room.
Welcome back, everybody. Just give about a minute for everyone to come back. All right. So I really hope that you found the questions, the answers to the questions that we put to you. I'm very excited to hear some of the questions that you have. So I think I'll hand over to Andile just to facilitate the questions, and I will take any of that at the moment.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kanile. I think Marina is going to be helping out with the questions this afternoon. So she's going to be handling questions for us, but I'm happy to assist as well if there's too many.
Yes, thank you very much. I must just say I had a lovely conversation in the small group of 3, and I heard really very practical tips from the colleagues that joined me in the session that actually built onto what you said, Dr. Kanile. It's like people are already doing good things to help each other and to maintain their mental health. And your talk just almost, opened up those, yes, we are doing it and it's going well. So please, colleagues, can I ask that you share those tips that you also shared in the discussion, in the breakout room, in the chat room? We are, how many? Over 35 people in this conversation at the moment, and you only shared it with 3 other people at the most. So please keep it coming. I'm going to specifically, So one of the questions that came through that Jason asked Dr. Kanile, and I think it's very topical. He said, how do we start destigmatizing personal time in the workplace? And I think specifically in our in our work from home environment or in our digital environment, where you find that there's no time. You can't say to someone, listen, I'm going to just take half an hour and have lunch often. What in your experience helps to destigmatize it? And then he follows that up to say, what are signs that time is being misused?
Right, that is a very good question. And you'll find that once the leaders in the team or the leaders of the group, it's actually seen more with the cool kids. So when you were younger, whatever the cool kids were doing, that's what everybody wanted to do. So what we find is that when leaders set that as a precedent to say, we take breaks in this team, then people understand that, okay, in the beginning, it's a bit strange, why are we taking breaks, every 10 minutes, or every 2 hours or whatever. When you make people prioritize that time, it makes it a necessity and therefore destigmatizes it, because then it's like, oh, you guys don't take breaks? How are you guys coping? Like, what do you mean you don't have that time? I think the other thing is also within yourself, let go of the guilt and the shame you feel whenever you take a break. I also sometimes struggle with this because I feel like I'm letting the team down, but it's important to allow yourself to be okay with taking the time away, because you're going to come back, and when you come back, you're going to be a better person. You're going to feel a lot more rested, you're recharged, etc. So that could be in the day, or that could be taking leave, or whatever it is that you need. With regards to the second part of the question, which was what are the signs of misuse of the time? So you would find that, for example, when people come back and they feel rested, they're usually able to get right back into work and contribute again to the team. So if you find that people are taking more breaks than necessary, and this is why, again, it's important as a team to communicate that this is how many breaks we take, this is what are the expectations. When you start seeing that people are now not meeting their targets despite them being communicated to everybody, when they're not communicating if they themselves are having issues and they're just doing whatever they want, when they are either heckling other team members, or if they're making excuses for why they need so many breaks, despite the fact that it's not really needed, then you find that this could be signs of misuse. So the first thing would be them actually not meeting their targets. Secondly, making excuses for why it's important that they take so many breaks and not others, because what must be done for one must be done for everybody. And then also if they are using the time for other things that are not part of the work.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. I think you're referring to that power of role modeling, first of all, in destigmatizing personal time, and to almost normalize the fact that I think, something that for me personally, it's school runs. I used to do school run very early in the morning to drop off kids, but now with COVID, some schools, the schools that we are in, started a bit later, or they don't start at all, but I still have to go drop off my kids. And I would tell my team, I'm on school run till 8:15. I can either join you on the call or, after that. And that almost normalizes the personal time that we also need to have, and that we would have had if we had also be at the office. And I agree, the fact that our ways of work have changed totally. So the results of our work and the outputs of our work is so important now, and to be measured against that instead of the time that we spend or the time that is just input. So if it's at all possible, Jason, to have, like Dr. Kanile also said, clear expectations. And if people are meeting those expectations and those targets, when they veer from that, then maybe start talking about or asking about misuse of that personal time. I'm seeing very good tips coming through from the chat. Nicole says, book 50-minute meetings and start them 10 past the hour to give the team time for a comfort break. That is such a great way of just being very practical around giving people a bit of personal time, even if it's just to do your banking or answer a personal email or attend to someone that's knocking at the door and dropping something off, right? And Ile is saying remove mail from mobile phones. That is, that's a big leap. That would be a big leap for me to do, but I'm sure very, very helpful in terms of other things. So, Dr. Kanile, what I would like to ask from you in terms of the tips that you've shared with us, what do you find people say, do they find most difficult to implement from the self-care tips and also the challenges that they find with their teams? What type of pushback do people experience to take on these things? It all sounds so practical and so easy to do, but why is it then that we don't do it? What is it that we need to overcome to just take that first step to start doing things?
Definitely the biggest one is exactly as you're saying, how do I remove the notifications off of my phone? So for example, with me, I use WhatsApp to communicate with my seniors if I'm having difficulty with a case or I need help, advice, if I need to send them images of investigations and tell them, this is what's happening, they need to call me back, etc. So I use my phone and I use WhatsApp, for example, as a way to work, but I also use it as a way to communicate with my family and friends. And so it's difficult because then if as a team you decide we're only going to communicate on email, there are particular inboxes that you can load onto your phone and you can say, on this particular email is the only one we communicate. Between 8 and 5, all communication needs to be addressed. After that, if I do need something urgent from you, I will have to call you. That number one clarifies the expectations and make sure that everybody's on the same page with regards to communication, because if we don't have multiple ways to contact someone, it's the one way and we know this is where all information is communicated with each other. The second thing is you remove the pressure of always having to miss your phone. So you know that feeling of leaving your phone somewhere and then looking for it and thinking, oh my gosh, I must be missing something. You now know, okay, I'm taking my break. It's, it's my hour lunch or whatever. My phone is away and my team knows where we are. I'm not going to get any notifications on WhatsApp or on a phone call. So that removes the anxiety of always having to be on your phone. And then the third thing it does is it also gives people a little bit of responsibility when it comes to managing that time. So we spoke about misuse of personal time. If the email is not responded to, then we know, okay, is there something wrong, or are you not, responding to the email? Because then we can manage those interactions with one another. The last thing I think I would say about this is, as a team leader, you need to again model this behavior. So if you guys agree it's email, it is email until it changes. Try as much as you can to avoid using WhatsApp or personal communication as a way to, communicate about work, because then you will lose the trust of your team, but also you don't want to mix work and personal lives. That's the one thing I always get into trouble with. People are like, Kanya, but you're online. And I'm like, yes, I know, but I'm not online for personal stuff. I'm online because I'm working, So that's it.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm hearing you saying, because the practicalities of it is probably different for each team, is that it's important to simplify the communication channels that you use for your team. And that's something very practical, is to say, we as a team agree that when we communicate, it is on Microsoft Teams, or it is only in our one WhatsApp group from these times to this time, and on email. And that we do not expect from one another to respond at certain times. I see there's quite a few tips coming through that says we don't have meetings till 10 o'clock, or there's a meeting limit time, which are all boundaries that people, that the teams have agreed with one another. And then the simplification of the communication channels, I think, is a very powerful one. There's just so many options. I mean, there's also various different apps on your phone, Telegram and WhatsApp and emails, and it's all with the red dot. So it can really become overwhelming to try and monitor all those channels. So practical tip is simplify the communication channels that you have with your team so that they have to monitor only one. I see Gabriel is saying that technical FM solutions cannot be performed remotely. Our teams remained on site. And I think a lot of our examples now revolved around the digital environment. Do you have any tips around when people go back to work and that getting back to work and being at work, that will also support their mental well-being and practice the tips that you've given us?
Definitely. As a medical doctor, I can't work from home. So I have to work in the hospitals or whatever. So when you do go back to work, it's again, as a leader, you are the custodian of preventing burnout. You need to make sure that your team is doing the right things. Again, so does that mean you have to start work later so that people can prevent the rush or the early morning rush of trying to get to work early on time? Setting, maybe even if you have to start work at 8 o'clock, maybe setting a meeting for later, because then people don't have to rush in, have their laptops open, get onto the meeting. They can settle into their day so that maybe the meeting only starts at 10. They can really get their heads around their day in the morning, grab a cup of coffee if they need to. When you are in the office, checking in on your team, you don't have to do it all the time, but just as you walk past someone's desk, checking in and they say, have you eaten today? Have you had a meal today? If someone has shared something with you, and particularly around their mental health challenges, just check in on them, hold them accountable. You said you wanted to exercise more. How is that going? I did this. I felt benefit in this. How would that help you? And then I think the last thing is with regards to people who tend to overperform, really encourage them to go home, because I feel that when you're at home, when you're at work, you get into a zone, you keep going, but you might forget about all the other things you have to do at home. And so encourage people to say, okay, it's 5 o'clock. I don't need you here. So whenever you are ready to leave, you can go. Because some people might feel that they want to just stay and get it done quickly, whether you're there or not. Are you seeing me? Can you see that I'm working really hard? I'm due for promotion. So relieve that stress from them and say, it's 5 o'clock. I'm happy with you to go home. I'm leaving. So then you can release your team.
I think that's the strongest message that I'm taking from today. And I also seeing that people are talking about it. Thank you for everyone that's posting in the chat. That it's that affirmation and giving the permission to your team, first to yourself as a leader to have boundaries, and then giving that permission to your team to say, let's apply those boundaries, because we know that the work is never going to get done. The work is never finished, whether you work digitally or whether you work on site. There is always going to be more work. And there's an interesting quote that I often use to say, work takes up the time that you make available to it. That's the natural law of work. So what I'm seeing here and what I'm hearing in the conversations also is that people say, let's help each other to create and maintain the healthy boundaries that we need to put around work to maintain our mental well-being. Let's acknowledge that we need to work at being mentally healthy and well, and let's support each other in that.
If I can just expand on that, I think also as leaders, I think the one thing you don't want to do is feel pressure from another leader that you are not doing something right or wrong. So as leaders and team managers, try and allow each individual team to have their own process. Because I feel that once you as a leader feel confident that you're able to manage your team in a way that is comfortable for you guys as a group and not compare it to another team, then you find that, you kind of focus on your own race, you stay in your own lane, and you guys can be successful instead of trying to say, well, in that team, they let them go off at 5 o'clock. Why do we go off at 6? But, don't compare teams and compare notes. Use them either synergistically or just stay focused on your own team.
Yes, absolutely. That's such an important point. And that's exactly, you're linking now back to one of the intentions of this Inner Core series is to connect leaders around these very important topics, and colleagues, to every one of you, to link you into your peers who are actually sitting with the same things. And we are so glad that you have joined us today to take the time to think together, to share practices and tips to learn together, and to hopefully share this frame of mind that you can take back into your teams, and that you can then start making very practical in your teams specifically. There's a lot of richness already in what you're doing, and I want to end off just with, by now that we want to get more feedback than just in your what you've done that you've given us in the chat. So I'm going to share my screen with you and ask you to do a Menti poll for us again, please. So just give me a moment so I can quickly share. So colleagues, Menti is a very handy tool that you can also use in your remote environment to get some feedback from your team in an anonymous way. So if you can all on your phones or on your browsers, go to Menti, www.menti.com. You can see that there's a bar that you can type in, then a code 85772051. And we'd like to ask you to type one word that captures what you are taking from today's session. What is the one word? So as you type it in, it is going to appear there on the screen. And we would like to just get that feel for what is it that you take, because you've heard a lot of information. It is all probably bouncing in your head along with all the stuff that you now need to go and do. But we'd like to just capture and hear from you. What is it that you are taking away? Openness. Thank you. If you see a word on the screen that you identify with and that you feel like as well, if you add it on, if you type it in as well, the word cloud is going to build bigger. Excellent. So yes, these words of kindness and trust and preserve the team talks to your role of leaders. Excellent. I'm scrolling through the comments just to see if there are any other questions. Dr. Kanyile was saying a favorite tip is, as leaders, you are the custodian of preventing burnout. It's so important. And thank you for landing that message today with us, and for it's not making it a far off goal, but providing us with very practical tips on how to do it. And I'm sure loosening up the ideas that the BRAL leaders who've participated in this inner course series can also take back into the room. So thank you very much for your kind talk, for sharing your time with us. And we wish you all the best with being a new mom and also balancing all these things that you bring to the workplace. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. And I really am loving all of the words that everybody is sharing. I pray that your teams are successful and that you have incredible mental health from this point on, not just for yourself, but also for your team. So thank you very much to BRAL Property Group, and everyone have a great evening.